We're seeing reports now this weekend that Marvel Comics has furloughed a large portion of their staff, with estimates between 35% to 50%. What does this mean? What's a furlough? Is this dark times and desperate measures from Marvel? What do we know about this news, and how does it impact things? Hey everybody, this is Perch. News coming out this weekend that Marvel Comics has furloughed staff as of basically Friday, as of a couple days ago, the 24th of April. Some reports that a few people will trickle into next week. And the idea that Marvel is basically announcing deep cuts. And at first this was described as primarily people who are interacting with the printers, with publishers, outreach people. But now we have gotten word that this has impacted Editorial and more of their core onboard staff, so not freelancers. So a couple important distinctions here, because you're going to hear a lot about this over the various weeks. So it's important to identify two things. First, there's staff members, people who have a paying ongoing job. That includes things like health benefits, in some cases ESPP, employee stock purchase plans, other things that goes along with being a full-time staff employee. The other is a freelancer or independent contractor. This is where, if you're thinking about most of the creators, the writers, the artists, those people, they are independent contractors. They're brought on contract for a run, a book. Contracts can have a set amount of time. In many cases, they look a lot like a full-time employee, but they are not. And there's an important distinction that big companies look out for, because if they start treating the contractors fully like employees, then they can get into lawsuits. Basically, it violates some federal laws if they get too close. And this famously happened with Microsoft. You may have heard about some lawsuits about 25 years ago now, about 20 years ago, I guess. Anyway, so most of the people that you think about as the face of Marvel, quote unquote, are independent contractors, and they had already been told by and large to, quote unquote, pencils down, or that the work would halt while new comics were not being made. In some cases, some comics got caught up, but Marvel had a pretty big mass of comics already put together. They were launching into a few of their events. You had Empire, you had Outlawed, they were gearing up for the new X-Men event. X-Men had been double shipping, so there was a pretty sizable amount of comics that were already in the can, so to speak. This action, these furloughs, we'll get to that in a minute, are primarily of office jobs. So these are marketing people. These are people who are, like I said, engaging with folks like Diamond, engaging with outreach, maybe doing some of the digital work, and certainly their editorial staff. Their editorial staff includes things like assistant editors, regular editors. You probably know these names. You do see them appear in comics, but these are people who are kind of managing the throughput, some of the business deals, HR staff, etc. These are people who had staff jobs. Now, one more important distinction to make is that we're talking layoffs and we're talking furloughs. So layoffs is when a company terminates the position. They send the person on their way. There typically is some level of severance, not always. In this time where a lot of people are getting laid off, there's not a lot of severance going around. But you don't do things like extend health insurance, and you're typically done. In fact, many big corporations will say if you get laid off, you actually can't rejoin the company for at least a year, and sometimes never. A layoff, and if you take things like a severance package, typically it's contingent upon you not ever coming back to work for that company. And we can get it another time and get into why people do things like that. Furloughs, on the other hand, is saying you still have a job, we're just not going to pay you. You don't have to work. You've retained your spot in the company, and it's a way of saying we believe that business will get back to normal, and that then your job will resume, your pay will resume, and everything else. Your health insurance generally is kept intact during this period, and it's just a layoff. It's not a layoff. There is an expectation you're coming back to the company. Now, fair being fair, in many cases, companies do furloughs initially, and then later those furloughs kind of roll into layoffs or reduction in force terminations. Right now we're looking at furloughs that could last probably about 6 to 8 weeks at Marvel. Nobody, from what I've talked to anyway, is getting a firm number as to how long the furlough is going to be. But it's generally expected, especially since many of these people are in either New York or California, that those are two regions hit pretty hard. This is going to be at least 6 to 8 weeks, kind of in that area. Disney as a whole furloughed, some massive amount. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of employees in the park, and these are people that typically work in the park or are, operations, IT, those kinds of places where they get actively furloughed. So you're going to hear a lot about this in the news from many different industries, but definitely Disney got hit pretty hard. And at least at first, it looked like Marvel was just kind of slowing the workforce through independent contractors. Now we are looking at, yes, things are going to extend. It's another sign that Marvel is not going to start printing and distributing comics anytime soon. People have been wondering that, given DC is doing that, but Marvel is not. So it is a sign that Marvel's, again, probably 6 to 8 weeks away from shipping out comics themselves. And given they're a major part of the comic industry, that's a pretty heavy blow. What does this mean in terms of kind of, what should we expect if these people are going to wander into permanent layoffs? I do expect, anybody has to expect at this point that if they're furloughing people, they're not producing comics for 3 months, 4 months, because remember this started in March, that you're going to see some reduction in force. Quarterly numbers, second quarter numbers are going to be terrible. There's definitely going to be a firm look at what needs to come back and what doesn't. So unfortunately, I do see fewer projects in the future. I do see some reduction in staff. I do see Disney as a whole, beyond Marvel, looking at this and saying, all right, it's time for some synergies. It's time for some cost cutting. This means if we have a marketing department over here for ESPN, and we have another one for ABC, and another one for Disney, and another one for licensed Disney, and another one for Marvel, we don't need that many. So we're going to consolidate. You're going to hear that word a lot in the fall. There is going to be a truing up that Disney has wanted to do, honestly, for quite some time. But when business is booming, it's always easy just to not get around to it. So definitely, some dark times. Does this mean that, we can expect all of the books that people online hated to never be published? No, those books are probably going to be published in some format. Does it mean that a lot of the people who maybe others don't like in the editorial staff, people that some have wondered, what do they do, that they're going to get terminated? Probably not. Again, when the people picking who's coming back into work are most of the same people that put these guys in their jobs in the first place. But definitely it's going to have an impact on Marvel's business. It's definitely a very stark difference to what's going on in DC at the time, right now, or I should say. And it's curious what happens to Marvel here coming out of this. Right now, Disney and Marvel are definitely banking on the fact their brand is extremely strong. They've got the movies, they've got the theme parks, they've got all these tie-ins, and it's going to all bounce back. And that's the expectation they have. Is that what will happen? It's hard to say. Again, DC is making a lot of moves right now to stay in the spotlight, whereas Marvel's kind of hanging low. Of course, people are going to bounce back and want to get to Spider-Man and want to get to X-Men and the big titles that they know and they've been hoping for. But all the same, delays, absence does not always make the heart grow fonder, as they say. So anyway, so that's the news basically. So what I guess I should close this. What's the exact number? We don't know. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've heard somewhere between 35 to 50% of Marvel's staff has been furloughed, has been told to, that the staff has gotten cut. Not all those people will come back. They will take the opportunity for some cost cutting here. There's no firm word. Of course, there wouldn't be, but we've seen this dance before. And I guess the other part of this is it's not just lower level staff. We're seeing it across the board with senior people, junior people. Names have not been identified yet, but some of that's starting to trickle out in social media. I would advise everyone, please don't go on and throw a little parade if somebody you don't like suddenly does not have a job. That's just low class. But we wish everybody well, whoever they are. It's no fun being out of work, no matter how much you didn't like something that they did. And, so that part's a shame. Definitely, it is, it's cost-cutting times are here, and that's what we're going to see a lot of. So anyway, those are the facts we know it. Do you have any questions? I will continue to update people on this story as it comes along. So leave your comments below. Like, subscribe, recommend to a friend if you don't mind. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. And most of all, thanks for listening.